liked academia, but I didn't want to get into academics. This was a very kind of cerebral opportunity, and I loved people. I love to talk to people. I'm a people person.
You
That's
are a
why.
people person. Yes,
Yeah,
you are.
I know this, man. And
Well, I
so
invited you here because you're
I
such a
know,
people
I know,
person. Yes,
because you are my people. You know that
exactly.
word?
There you go.
Exactly.
Welcome to Becoming an Attending, a guide for future ER physicians. Each episode delivers financial insights into navigating undergrad, medical school, residency, fellowship, and becoming an attending physician. Your host, behavioral financial advisor Yohance, is here to ensure you're surviving and thriving through your transitions. Now, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Money Script Podcast. It's your host, Yohance Harrison. So happy to be here with each and every one of you today for another segment called Becoming an Attending. Yes, this is directed and produced exclusively for our individuals that are in medical school or planning to go to medical school. You may still be in college, but in medical school, headed into residency or in those first few years of becoming an attending physician. So we know you're working hard. We know there's a lot of sleepless nights. So I want to bring you other physicians that have already crossed over, that are there, that are doing it, that are also diversifying their lifestyle as well. Today we have, for those of you watching on YouTube, you already see who he is. We have the illustrious, the amazing, the talented, the multi-talented, who also went to the top school, medical school in the nation, as so he said, Dr. Savoy Drummer. How are you, doctor?
Well, first of all, you never say this in my face. So that is wonderful that you're saying it on your
But
podcast.
this is how I think of you when you're not
But this is,
around.
but this is recorded. So this
It
is
is.
great that all of these, all these future attending and early career attendings can actually see what you will say about me on a recorded line. No, I really appreciate it, brother. It's always a privilege. Working alongside with you. You've done so much to help educate our people. And also just, being so community focused and focusing on, the wealth of our professionals. So I'm glad to be here and have a great conversation.
Let's have it. Let's have it. So today's topic is location, location, location. Now, a lot of times people hear that phrase, they think about real estate, buying real estate. And when you are becoming an attending, your locations are important. And I know that you can attest to that. So I want to break it down into three different sectors. So location as in where you go to medical school, location as in where you commit to do your residency or get chosen to do your residency. And then finally, the location that you choose to go and be employed. So let's start with your location, location, location. So medical school was NYU.
So medical school, well, let me take it one step back. So I went to
Okay.
college. I went to college at Howard University. And
Okay.
so we
HU.
have
I
to
see. I know you see the Morehouse
always,
up there, so you just wanted to
yeah,
bring
yeah.
that
So
up. I know. I know.
we always have to just add that, right?
We do have to add that. And shout out to the HBCUs. Yes.
Shout out to HBCUs. And then I went to NYU for medical school. So I went from, Howard University is located in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
Um, I'm originally a Southerner, right? So I grew up down south. I went to Howard. It was a great experience. I love the East Coast so much. I said, hey, you know what? Let's try New York City. Went to NYU. Um, After 4 years of that experience, I still wanted to stick around the East Coast, and I trained at the University of Pennsylvania at Penn. So, those were 12 years of my life that I decided to locate on the East Coast. At the time, I had a twin brother. He was going to law school over Columbia. I just had this, my family was there, but also, the social experience was there. And so when I decided that it was almost purely for social reasons. But it was also because, and this is one of the reasons why NYU has ascended its ranks, is that NYU gave me a full ride to go to med school there. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to follow the money. There are other places that didn't, do that. But it was only a tuition scholarship because just living in New York City, especially at the time, was
Oh, it's
incredibly
to this
expensive.
day, to this day.
I tell people, just breathing oxygen in New York costs money. You know what I
I
mean?
just got
So
back from New York. I just got back from New York yesterday, and yeah, I came back and I was like, "Why do my pockets hurt? That was weird." Like,
they hurt. It's like you think
oh,
it. Yeah, I think it's arthritis at my age, but it's really
oh,
the
maybe it's
sucking,
that too. Oh,
the
Savoy, let me
sucking.
tell you, I'm at a very nice hotel that I love, and this is no shame to the hotel, the one hotel in Brooklyn down in Dumbo. Love
Yep,
the hotel.
yep.
Decided I'm gonna go. I just got in kind of late on a Sunday. I said, I'm gonna go sit and look at the Brooklyn Bridge and have a glass of wine, just a glass of wine. I
Mhm,
order my glass of wine. He
mhm,
brings me the bill, and it
mhm.
was $32. And I
That
said, "Where's the rest of the bottle?"
Let me tell you that, but that's a great problem to have.
Whew,
That it's only
I guess
$32
yes.
because I mean, just again, just going to New York and you have like the tax from the city, you got the tax for the for staying in hotels, you have all those things, and in all of your parts of your lifestyle, you see the influence of these unaccountable costs, right? These things that you don't really see on, in business, we don't see on the balance sheet. What we do is we see it in all these different places. And so, I thought that I was just getting this wonderful opportunity to go to NYU, but in fact, I mean, I accrued a significant amount of debt, and this is me. I remember I lived in a dorm with 32 people who shared a three-bathroom stall. Like it
Ooh.
wasn't extravagant at all. It was grimy New York City. But again, just to eat, just, for clothing, books, living, it just costs more. And so, again, relatively speaking, I didn't have to take care of my tuition, but I had to take care of everything else. My mom and dad were teachers. They were elementary school teachers and a college professor, so they didn't have a ton of money. And shout out to mom and dad. I think they gave me $2,500 a year to go to school at the time. So all the rest of it was loans. Um, and then, with that decision, again, leaving New York, in my mind, obviously there's the match, and you've got, as you said, a 50% say in the matter. And, you're not chosen, they choose you type of thing. And so when I interviewed, I actually interviewed all throughout the country. I knew I wanted to go into emergency medicine. Um, I had no idea where I was going to go. I know I wanted to stay on the East Coast, and my first choice was Penn because it was halfway in between New York and DC. And it's like, well, I can just go to both. Um, but I think my second choice was in Chicago. My third choice was maybe in LA. It was because no one knew anything. You had no idea. You kind of went for the experience. But I landed over at Penn. And so it was a fairly easy transition. It was an hour and a half south of New York. And so I took, I remember that I took out my first credit card, actually, when I was to pay for my board prep over
Mm.
at med school. And I used that same credit card to move from New York to Philadelphia. And so that was my first foray into credit. And it was
Well,
in
other
fact
than the other loans that you've taken out
other than
yeah.
the loans, what I'm talking about,
But this was, hey,
this
you
was
could
the
spend
real
it and
deal.
you could spend it on a glass of wine too if you wanted to. So,
Ended on a glass of wine, my bro. That
mm,
$32 was
yeah.
was heavy. So, when you start residency, again, you're not making a ton of money, right? When I calculated it, it was less than minimum wage, but as per the hours, because this is before
Wow.
the hour restriction that they put on. And so it was definitely one of those really challenging experiences. I lived in the hood over in West Philly. Um, my parents were nice enough to give me a really old Isuzu Rodeo so I could get from my apartment all the way to the city in the snow because Philly, had some very, let's just say, stressful parking situations in the winter. But went did that, performed as best that I could, with what was financially available to me. Um, and then when I decided to finally exit residency, that's where the real choice starts, right? That's
Mm.
when, as a young attending, you're really looking at, well, how much money can I make? How much loans do I have? What are the means for me to kind of begin that next stage of my life in terms of having a good social life versus being financially responsible? And I always tell people there's nothing like it, struggling, as you heard, for 12 years. And then, the first month that you're getting paid more money than you did for every year of your life combined, right? And so you're like, oh yeah. So then that comes in the responsibility, and then you start getting into the investor mindset as to how am I going to manage these loans? How am I going to kind of invest in my life? And then also, how am I going to have a little bit of fun? So that is my journey.
But so when you were making this decision for attending, you
Mm,
mentioned the social aspect.
right.
There's also the family aspect as well, because you
Family
mentioned your
effort.
family's in South and you had a brother that was still
Down
in
south,
the, mhm.
100%. So my first landing spot was actually Atlanta. So
Oh,
yes,
okay.
around your Morehouse brethren, right?
Mhm.
So it was a great situation in emergency medicine. They paid very well at the time. I basically worked at Kennesaw Hospital. Shout out to the largest private emergency department in the country.
Oh,
And I was their first resident that they took straight out of school. And I remember I was working night shifts. I was just going through patients. But my mindset at the time, when you're young, it's like a car that has no miles on it, right? So, you want to work hard, have some fun, and then just generate income. You're like working, 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 working. And it was funny. I always tell people, like, you see the person today, but you don't see the work that went behind making that person.
true.
So Atlanta were those work days. And uh, I started becoming more of a manager and a director of a couple of emergency departments out there, not by choice, but because people told me I had to do it or else. But really started understanding more the business aspects of medicine, right? That's when I first started getting to organizational management, understanding the P&Ls, all that stuff. And so I was in Atlanta for about 5 years, and my transition to California occurred just by happenstance. And I
Really?
met, yeah, I met a guy who was at a conference, and he said, "Hey, wow, you're pretty talented. You seem to know your stuff," because I was presenting. How would you like to move to California and be my vice president? And I was like, I don't think so,
Wait,
man.
who was that
I
guy?
don't- Yeah, this is a guy named Dr. Marin. It was actually
Okay.
it was for one of the competitors that I'm at right now. Um, but at that time, I think I was very ambitious,
Mm.
and I was like, well, after working all of these night shifts, I wanted to change, right? So I couldn't continue to, I, I understood that my run rate was limited. And so for me, and this was all a personal choice, I liked academia, but I didn't want to get into academics. This was a very kind of cerebral opportunity, and I loved people. I love to talk to people. I'm a people person.
You
That's
are a
why,
people person. Yes, you
yeah,
are.
I know this, man. And
That's
and
why I
so
invited you here because you're
and
such
I
a
know,
people
I know,
person.
because you
Yes,
because you are my people. You know that word?
exactly. There you go.
Exactly, exactly. So when I did that, I really started um immersing myself in business and became a partner for their company. And I lived in Los Angeles. Great location. I'd never experienced anything like this being a Southerner. But this is one of the things I really want, your people to understand is that if you are tied to a location, you are going to have limited aspects in terms of your career, right? So I wanted to get into a more business oriented, business minded aspect. I could not do that in Atlanta. I was limited in Atlanta. There were very few groups that did what I did. LA gave me the opportunity, so I took that. And even in LA, I ended up going to my current group because there was a black guy. His name was Wes Curry. Shout out to Wes Curry, who's kind of the oldest black physician who was the CEO of a billion-dollar healthcare company. I just emailed him. I was like, "Hey, man, like, I don't know, but I've never met you. I think what you've done is great. I'd love for you to be my mentor." He asked me to meet him in West Covina at a Fridays, and we talked for we must have talked for 5 hours just about business and life. And he said, "Hey, you know what? For that, forget the group you're with. Come on with me." And I did it. And I've been with Vituity for 15 years. But again, that just shows, you know, if you have a mentor, that's great. But if you have a champion who's going to give you those opportunities, that's what really opens the doors for you. And so for all the folks who are medical students and residents now, look for those opportunities later. Wes, he again kind of tailored that and allowed me to understand having that professional business partnership with financial planners, having that professional, business partnership with um, you know, everything private equity to investing, and like all those things as a doctor become open to you. And then it didn't help. I mean, it didn't hurt that living in LA, the movie industry was here and I got to follow some of my passions and hobbies and really spend a significant amount of my time kind of developing that craft. So again,
We're
that's
gonna. I think we got a couple clips we're gonna throw in here of that. We have
please,
seen you
please.
behind, well, in front of the camera, not just here, but
I don't
there's some
know where
stuff
you're
out there.
going. Please be kind. Remember, I will see you again in person just a little bit.
You will. Well, but I'm not
So
showing anything that people can't find on their own. I didn't get like this
uh,
isn't
not any,
B-roll.
not any, not anything that a great stalker would find. That's wonderful. But I mean, it's really, I just want people to understand that being a physician is just becoming an attending is just a platform for you to do other things, right? And a
Well
lot
put.
of times people go through this thinking that this is your endpoint and traditionally we're all taught to embody the physician, right? But all of you, I'm sure, will transform into again investors, real estate brokers, movie directors, um, all a whole host of things which you can't even dream about. But again, having a location that really suits, the things that you like and your passions and the people that will set you apart in terms of, again, creating a great social life, but then having a great financial strategy for you to ultimately become successful.
And we're going to come back to the social life because I think that's an important topic as it relates to burnout, which is something we've talked about before on the show. I want to just take a pause moment because there have been some developments in the federal government and in lending and student loans,
Mhm.
and I've been getting dozens upon dozens of frantic calls from first year medical students asking, well, what does this mean for me next year? And so the rules just came out, so I pulled them up here so I can just kind of read them. But as I understand it, the subsidized lending is going away. And for those of you that are not as familiar with it, if you're just maybe you're not yet in medical school or you're in college, and a lot of people just sign their FAFSA blindly. They don't know what they're signing, but they know if they don't sign it, they can't pay for college. But there were two different types of loans you could get from the federal government that federal government would back, meaning you didn't have to have a lot of credit in order to or establish credit in order to qualify for these loans. And those loans were subsidized loans and unsubsidized loans. Subsidized means that the government was going to, I'll use quotes here, pay your interest, meaning not charge you any interest while you were still a full-time student for those loans. And unsubsidized, the government was not paying your interest so that the interest would accumulate on those loans, which meant if you had a subsidized loan, excuse me, an unsubsidized loan that's say $40,000, and let's just say the interest rate is 5%. 5% of 40,000 is about 2 grand. So 2 grand would be adding to your loan each and every year until you graduate. Whereas if it's subsidized, that 2,000 wasn't being added. So subsidized lending is gone starting 2026 school year. And now
Yeah. So
everything, go ahead.
no, no. So it's even worse, right?
Oh
Because
yeah, because we didn't get into the medical school part or the graduate school part.
right. Well, I'm saying that it's $2,000 a year of compound interest. You know what I mean?
Yes,
It
yes.
it you would have 2,000 one year, and your next year it's be 2,100, and then it's 2,002. So
And the new loan that you just borrowed for the next
and the new
year.
loan that
Oh
you
yeah.
right, right. And so I will tell you that having a subsidized loan for me through my education saved me I don't know, probably $30,000, right? I mean,
At least easily.
at least just, and I'm just talking about just the subsidized portion of it. You know what
Oh
I mean?
yeah.
And so it's in addition, when they change from subsidized to unsubsidized, you look at when I went to school, the interest rates were very, very
Oh,
low.
much lower, like half
Oh man, I
easily.
mean, I know, this is going to age me, but my loans were 3%, you know what I mean?
Same.
Like, you know, but now you look at where the rates are with what the Fed has done, um, because of inflation, and now you're talking about, 6, 7%. That's a huge change. So, we
It gets worse. So we're just gonna pile onto this thing. And the cost of school has doubled, if not tripled, in some
yeah,
situations
yeah, yeah,
since we were in college in the early 2000s.
yeah. So that's the whole point, right? Is that like the government has said essentially that um, we're going to make sure that you pay for something more expensive at a much higher rate of borrowing than you did even 10 years ago, right? Well, technically even 2 years ago,
Even two
right?
years ago. True. Hmm.
I mean, because interest rates really just exploded just, actually 3 or 4 years ago. And so if you have, an older brother that went to school through graduate school and is 5 years older than you have a grossly different financial situation by all metrics than just that, right? So this is a generational change, and I just want to make sure that people are aware of that.
So let's just take a quick look at the program costs. So for the School of Medicine for NYU, cost of attendance, full tuition for 2025 is $64,250. The new graduate loan cap, so they got rid of the graduate student plus loan, so that's gone, but there are still federal direct unsubsidized student loans for graduate school. The new cap on that graduate school loan is $50,000.
Yep. Yep. So in other words, if you don't have it, you're going to have if it costs 64 and the most you can get is 50, you are responsible for $14,000 from somewhere, irregardless, right? It doesn't matter if you're coming from a single family home and your mom is on, welfare. It doesn't matter if you're an orphan. It doesn't matter.
No.
It does not matter. That's what it gets. So, one or two things are going to have to occur. Now, I will give a shout out to NYU because NYU actually has a new program where their endowment has allowed them to give scholarships to all the medical students, regardless of
Mm.
where you come from. So
Okay.
that is the exception to the rule, but some medical schools have been doing that. But there's going to be a real pressure to decrease what the federal government is also hoping that they can decrease the overall cost of being there. But again, that was just the tuition. You're not talking about your room and board,
Not talking
right?
about, yep, nope, that
Yeah.
is
And so like people who come from middle class, I would say even some upper middle class means are still wondering how they're going to pay for this. You know what I mean? If they do not have access to outside funding. And that's why there's this whole discussion about, well, graduate school, medical school, especially because it's longer, law school, is really just something for the rich now, right? Because
yeah, it's
you
scholarship. Yeah, those that are lucky enough to get scholarships, and those that just have the means. Because, again, and that's the other thing we have to consider is that these unsubsidized loans are going to have interest accumulated, and the unsubsidized loans are going to have a interest rate that's associated. If you decide to borrow that from somewhere else, I've seen
oh, there's
graduates with
so much, yeah,
20-25% interest rates on what essentially they're taking out personal loans to go to school,
yeah.
with the interest being unsubsidized, meaning it's accumulated. I have seen, and this is before the law changed. I have seen, or I'm working with right now, physicians that borrowed $300,000, which is $100,000 more than the current limit cap lifetime limit. So they borrowed $300,000, and because the interest was accumulating on those loans, they owe close to $400,000.
Mm, mm,
And
mm.
they just got their first, and they just got their first paycheck last week.
Right. And so, you're talking about, the price of a reasonable house in most locations, and we're gonna put that on you on day one. And, not all, people who exit law school or even medical school make that kind of money, right? There's
No,
this
exactly. No. I
misinformation.
mean,
If you're a pediatrician and, are a general practitioner and you're there working for your communities, it's tough. And so I'm sure this is going to influence a whole host of things, as in, some people will not want to be in there's going to be this conflict because some people are not going to want to be in residencies that are long because the unsubsidized portion accumulates for a longer period of time. But then on the flip side, some people are going to be like, the only way I can pay off these loans is for me to go into neurosurgery, right?
yeah.
Because the mindset is, it's no longer a community mindset. It's just a transactional mindset, right? And especially for the Black community, you see profound effects with this. When you start including some of the pressure in terms of reviewing scholarships that are, Black students or Latino or any minority, even women have been able to apply for, you're not going to be able to have that, right? And so, unfortunately, you're looking at a very monolithic, very tight demographic that is only truly able to access this higher education. So that is the tipping point that we're seeing here, and
Yeah.
it makes it very, very difficult. So
It's
again,
terrifying. It's
no,
terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying for the marginalized communities, of course. It is.
no, 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 of course. And so, I mean, I think that again, having these discussions, and that's why I'm proud of you, but yet I'm also like, hey, this is a you know, this is when your neighborhood watches your kid. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
In that it's not just your income that you get as a doctor that's going to define your financial future. There are a whole host of decisions that you have to make. And those things you can still do very, very well. You know what I mean? But we very rarely within the medical community, especially in the Black medical community, we talk about it, or we're really truly invested in finding solutions and looking at kind of alternative ways to get there. So
So with
yeah.
these new limits on federal borrowing for undergraduate and graduate school, how do you think medical students should weigh cost of living when choosing where they apply and where they hopefully get chosen as residents?
Yeah. I always tell people like unlike law school, right? And I have a twin brother who's a law professor over at Georgetown, so we talk about this all the time. Prestige and where you go to law school, it means a lot. Whether you made law review means a lot. All these things for, if you were looking for, big firm law. But for physicians, like one MD is the same as the other, and
Okay.
that's the practical realistic view of how things work out, right? And
Mm.
I would really encourage um, medical students that go to a place where you can financially manage, where you can mitigate these costs. It's not going to affect, the specialty that you get in. You could go to the University of Alabama and still become an emergency medicine doctor. It doesn't give you some greater weight. This is all about hubris, right? This is pride. This is me saying that I'm going to X, Y, and Z, right?
Mm.
You know, you have to consider your cost of living because, um, again, you're going to tack on at least an extra $100,000 a year, just with living expenses. And I'm being kind, right? It's
Hmm. You are.
saying
You're being kind.
2,500. I mean, saying $25,000 a year, to live in any place in medical school to survive is not like you're you're living high or anything. This is,
Hmm.
you know, those dollars will mean something when you come out as an attending, regardless of how much money you make.
Now, devil's advocate here, because you at the top of the show, you alluded to a lot about how your location created avenues for additional opportunities. So, I mean, how much does geography really matter for building a career in medicine? So let's say, let's talk to those physicians that are in their second, third year of residency.
Right.
And now it's time for them to make those, and they're coming out of school already with the $200,000-$300,000 worth of student loans, which more than half of physicians do. So there's most of them come
No,
out
no.
with hundreds of thousands.
Now that's a completely different question, right? So we're,
Okay.
question about where you go to medical school is irrelevant, all right?
Mhm.
Because it's a medical degree. Where you do your residency, again, people have got to understand with the match and so forth, you're just going to be where you're going to be. It's it's not even going to dictate where you're going to get a job, right? So I was in Philly. I got my first job in Atlanta. It didn't matter, right? They were
Mhm.
interviewing people from all over. Obviously, it's great to have relationships, but if you do the, a good job and, if you're coming and you have great skills, you're going to have options. So now once you start becoming an attending, if you're a resident, you're looking at where you're going to work. Oh, it has everything to do with cost of living, right? Because now you're making decisions as to you're having a realistic understanding as to what your income is going to be. You need to look at the state that you're going to be in and the income tax for that state. There are places like Texas that charge no state income tax. There are places like California that will charge
Charge
you,
all the income tax.
right? And so, understanding that is a completely reasonable thing to weigh on one end. Texas, could continue to compare Texas, California if I'm a resident. And if I go to Texas, it's much less expensive for houses down in Texas than it is for California. Um, and those things are like completely reasonable reasons to move to Texas. Now California offers its own thing. Obviously, we always say that our taxes are for the weather that we have,
Yeah, the
right?
sunshine tax. Oh yeah, sunshine
It's
tax.
the sunshine tax, and we're gonna be happy every day. And in LA, you can, the social life, and those are things again that you've got to look at for yourself and say, is that worth that for me? But then there are other industries, right? So, in Texas, you're much more around oil and energy, right? And so,
Oil, energy, real estate, and
well,
another thing
I'm
about
a,
Texas is you have a lot of people with money. So if you want to get into other areas of medicine like aesthetics, there's a lot of people that pay a
a
lot of
lot of
cash to change their body
they don't do that,
in
right?
Texas. Mhm.
But I would say that LA is the most
Oh, LA has that as well. Yeah, but again,
ridiculous.
but you got the sunshine
Right.
tax. So
But you got the
yeah,
sunshine tax. But what I'm
yeah,
saying is that like there are other things like movies, right? If you want to make
yes.
movies, like the California thing, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so there are other, I mean, music, entertainment, branding, content creation, all those things here in California. Again, there are plenty of physicians that have kind of created their own niche and gone out and done that and found alternative ways. Shout out to one of my boys, Dr. Iggy. He just finished his residency. He was
He
able
was here
to,
in Dallas. He just left Texas. He was
he
here.
just left Texas. But
Hmm.
I mean, he was able to pay for his house, right,
Yeah.
with content creation. And, he came out to LA and was asking how to make films with me and stuff like that. So it's like people just make the decisions that they're going to make. But I think as a resident, you start to really understand the why. Like, okay, so this is what I need to
Mhm.
do. This is how much I'm going to make. This is yeah, and but the only way that they get there is again by talking to mentors like yourself, right? Because when I came out, I had no idea. I just knew I needed to make a bunch of money really quick, which is kind of, not a great way to look at things. But, just I would say the only other piece about for attendings to look at location is not necessarily, and I'll have to put this in very briefly, don't just you have to look at the location of your practice model, right? So you can work for a hospital. That is a practice location. You could work for private practice. That is a practice location. But you also just need to be aware of like working in that, in a private equity environment that is very unstable because private equity has taken a lot of different specialties and commoditized medicine to the point where you no longer have a say. Okay.
Mhm.
So I would say private equity groups across every specialty are much more prevalent in Texas than they do in California that has more partnerships like I have, right? And I knew that I wanted to own my business. I wanted to be a partner. That was very, very important for me. in terms of managing my wealth, in terms of tax
Hmm.
write-offs. Because I knew if I'm going to be in California, I wanted to create an entity or a way that I could manage those taxes. And so just, being, you know, taking the entire kind of um, amount of things that you need. You put it into a pot and it comes out with different locations that you're going to want. But just make sure that you understand how all of those things affect the rate that you're ultimately going to be able to pay off your loans and also the type of investments that you're ultimately going to be able to make, right? Like, do you still want to, when you finish your residency after being a neurosurgeon, do you still feel like, well, I got to live in a one-bedroom apartment,
Yeah.
just because I can afford it, right? These are choices. Or some people may say, hey, I just want to work really hard for a year and live in that one bedroom apartment because in year two, then I'm going to be able to have paid everything off. Like again, just don't think that the race ends when you become an attending. The check comes, but the race is a lifetime race, and just for everybody's, perspective, like just this year, I paid off my loans, right? Just
Hey, hey, look at that.
dude, it was a month ago. It was a month ago that
No
I,
wonder we had so much fun last time we saw each other. I kept
bro,
trying to pull out my credit card and you were like, "No, I
You're
got
like,
it." I was
nah,
like,
bro, the
"Oh,
dollars, it's on me, my guy. Right. So, I mean, this is the long-term play that we all take. Now,
yeah."
I was able to kind of amortize those payments so that they worked for me and so forth. But, again, you got to have a life. Just this is something that we've committed to, but just think about these things. Even as soon as you're a medical student, like what's the plan? You know what I mean? Once you get in med school, you're gonna be a doctor, dude. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like congratulations, you're going to have an income, but like be strategic as to mitigating your costs, understanding what your cost of living is going to be, understanding the specialty, understanding like how different states affect the money that you make. These things are material. They're huge, huge,
Oh
huge
yeah.
difference.
Now, I want to mention one other change, and we'll switch gears a bit here. The PSLF, Public Student Loan Forgiveness, also will be coming to an end in July of 2026, meaning no new applications can go into that program. So I do encourage anyone that is finishing up residency, if you aren't already in that P, if you're, excuse me, if you're at a public hospital right now or a nonprofit group right now,
Yep.
make sure you've signed up for PSLF and you're in the program. Who knows where you end up when you're done with residency, whether you'll stay in a public organization or a nonprofit organization or private or even hybrid telemedicine, all the other things that are out there. Just get credit for the years that you have, get in the program because after July 2026, no one else will be able to apply for that program. And for those that are curious what the program did, it was a 10-year program where you work 10 years in public health or nonprofit health. The government would forgive your eligible loans. And I've seen doctors, nurses all have hundreds of thousands of dollars forgiven, but that program will be changing to something that you'll have to work a little bit longer to get any forgiveness and pay a lot more interest, et cetera. So with that,
And by the way, that was a great program. I just worked with a guy who decided to work out in New Mexico. And he was like, look, you know what? I'm working at this rural setting at this critical access hospital. And that it basically doubled his income. I was like, because
Mhm.
his loans were so significant. So it's a shame that that's coming to
It
an end.
is. Now, I mentioned telemedicine, hybrid care, and also locums care. Do you think that in the future, as those continue to grow, because I know a lot more doctors are choosing to do the locums or blending that with some telemedicine and not committing themselves to 10, 15 shifts a month at one hospital. Do you think that location will matter as much in the future as these different entities grow?
You know what? A great question. I think that like part of it depends on your specialty. If you're
Mm,
a radiologist, you can literally live anywhere in the country right now, right? It's never been something that you care because all of it is, it's like it was the first foray into telemedicine, right? Everybody
hmm
just drops you off and gives you something. So that's very different than an
An
anesthesiologist.
anesthesiologist. That's the same. That's exactly one I thought of as well.
Yeah, yeah. You got to be
You
there.
got
You got
bedside
to
care. You got to be
get
there.
there like all the time, right? So it does depend. I think that um, when people look at when people look at telemedicine, understand that in general, you're going to have a lower rate of compensation, which is fine. Because again, the burn that you may feel or whatever feeling of being in a hospital that we all have, it's probably going to be, mitigated a little bit less. I've done telemedicine work, for my group. I understand that. But just don't expect the same level of compensation. That would be unrealistic. Uh, I would also say that, locums work can be extremely um, financially rewarding in
Mm,
the short term, but depending on what other long-term options you have, it doesn't necessarily, it may or may not make sense for a long-term strategy. One of my really good friends, she's an anesthesiologist over in Houston. She basically has made her entire living off of locums work. She's traveled all around. That is what drives it. Me, I'm a partner for my group. So as I sit here today, I own my practice and money right now is being made for me as an owner of the group.
mm,
If you work for a locums, you don't ever have that real opportunity to become an owner of your practice. And so as you get older, as you mature in your specialty, like it's good to know that at least a certain percentage of your income is coming from the work that's being done as an owner. And so, it's like again, it's that burn rate, you know what I mean? I
yeah.
heard this really funny, this one resident told me he when I was a medical student, he said every person has a set number of patients that they're going to see. Some people may see 100,000 patients. Some people, have this internal clock where they can see 500,000. But once you hit this rate, it all ends. And how you can find ways to slow down getting to that top level rate is how long you can continue to practice medicine. It's very similar to like being an NBA player. If you want to play every game, sooner or later knees are going to hurt and so
Yeah.
forth, as opposed to, restricting restricting the number of games that you play, the number of minutes that you play. You're obviously going to extend your career. You know what I mean? And these players in the league have now you see all these 38-year-old, 48-year-old players in the league because they worked on restricting their time. And I think in medicine, that's the game, right? Is you can continue to work forever, but how miserable are you going to feel by continuing that rate? Different people have different clocks, so no disrespect
Yeah.
for it, but I know like for me, I can practice, easily up into my 60s because I've created this ownership pathway for me to do so. But, this is all just, choices for different people to consider.
So I want to spend just a few minutes. And by the way, thank you for all of this amazing insight for our soon to be attending or um, recently become attending. I know we just, this is August. So I know there's a lot of
Yeah.
docs who just got their first paychecks, especially in ER medicine, just got their first paychecks a few days ago. So don't spend it all. Um, you're now making some money in alternative ways, and you alluded a lot earlier to being in Los Angeles and having access to the Hollywood business.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what attracted you to Hollywood, and how did you get your foot in the door? Because a lot of people, they say it's all about who you know in Hollywood. I mean, who did you know?
It really is who you know in Hollywood. So I went to Howard. It is kind of the bastion for fine arts, right? We've got a long history of, Felicia Rashad, of, just wonderful talent that's kind of come through Howard. And I was a biology major, right? So I was a nerd. I was down in the valley and I would see these people with these amazing experiences. My roommate was in the acting program, would just go up to New York every weekend. And I was like, man, you have like the most incredible life. And so that really stuck with me, throughout my training. And, even living in New York and going up to the theater and Broadway, like there was always, I think, some creative part of me that was, there. But again, being from the South and parents that were very practical, like kind of stayed, the line. Um, when I started in film, it was by happenstance. I was in LA. You can go to any party, you find a guy, and it was a friend of a friend. He said, "Hey, we're gonna do this little thing, and it's actually we're gonna film it in Chicago. Would you like to become a producer and kind of learn about it?" And I took a lot of time. I thought that I knew what I was doing, and I said, "All right, we're gonna do it." Um, and I got a lot of people in my family involved. My daughter was there. She was actually co-starred with Keith Sweat's son. It was this little thing. We're like, oh, it's cute, and it gave her exposure. Because one of my rules with investments are I either always want to bring people with me, right? So if I'm going to invest in something, if I lose it all, at least somebody got something out of it, or it becomes a learning experience. And so we shot some romantic comedies. They ultimately, amazingly, ended up on Netflix. And the thing about uh, and as an executive producer, you always want to make sure that your ROI is not just being distributed, but financially. I probably lost 20% of my money, even though it went all on Netflix, right?
Mm.
And that kind of taught me that like just because the movies that you make go someplace doesn't mean that you're going to be rewarded financially for it.
As an
That
EP, I know that too.
I mean that is like that was my biggest lesson, right?
Yeah.
And so I became much more focused on the financial aspect of it.
Mm.
There was another producer who actually worked so that was, all black, cast. It was black romantic comedy. It was great. And we did several of those. But then I met one of my colleagues that I work with right now. I met through a mutual friend in LA, I think at a screening. And his name was Luke Daniels. Shout out to Luke. Um, but he really did higher level stuff, and um, he's this Greek guy. He's got a very diverse set of partners. And I told Luke, I was like, one of the things that I want to do as a producer is I either want to produce films that either highlight um, Black people or at least a large Black talent um, or a director so you may not see them behind the camera, or make sure that we're highlighting women. It was like one of those three things, right? Because again, if I'm going to invest in something, I just want to make sure that at least I'm putting the right energy out into the universe
Well,
for
no,
it.
it goes back to what we were talking about as being a physician, understanding your why.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. Like these are not like feel good stuff. These are, the first one I did went to Tribeca. Another one I did, went to Sundance. But these are all different films that like, they're action, sci-fi, horror, all these different ways. But working with him, oh yeah, the ROI. Like these films are going to Lionsgate, to
Mm.
A21, to
So
Netflix.
he has those relationships
He
already.
has those
Yeah,
relationships, right?
yeah.
And understanding, again, it is who you know as it relates to not just distribution, but getting a reasonable valuation for your film. But again, the reason why I learned how to do a lot of this stuff is that I took a lot of the insight that I had in medicine and understanding as a partner for a business in medicine. I understand how a P&L worked. I understand what above and below the line worked, and just how to look at money in a way that probably if I was a W-2 or I wouldn't get that exposure. So I think that I was
Mm.
really able to do that quickly. But then COVID hit, and when all the productions went down, I got a call from Netflix and they were like, "Hey, we're trying to start our productions back up. Can you help us out?" And they were like, "Well, Savoy, you're one of the few people in Hollywood that was a doctor and a producer." So they put me on this conference call, and I'm not lying to you, like maybe 400 like producers are all on saying, "Hey, Savoy, how are we going to fix this?" So I was like, "Well, this is what we're doing at my hospitals. This is how we're fixing
Mm.
things." I hung up the phone. I got a call from Netflix saying Kevin Hart has a show tomorrow. We need protocols. We need everything. We need labs. We need everything done. And this was one of those like luck equals preparation plus opportunity. So
Yes.
I invited some of my friends, who are nurses. I remember it was outside my house and we're building plans in the middle of the night. And we're like, let's just do it. And we pulled it off. It was the first show that Netflix had that came back from COVID. And again, during that time, like, so let me put like that was successful. So at that time, they said, all right, Savoy, we want you to do all of I mean, not all, I'd say like 90% of the live shows across the country that we're going to do. And so I just, again, because I was a partner and I was an owner, I had the flexibility of saying, hey, you know what,
Mm.
this is great. I traveled across the country. I worked with, I worked with everybody. I mean, Jay-Z to Chris Rock, to Dave Chappelle, to I did the Olympics for US track and field. I just did all this stuff. And I was like, no, I became known in this town as like, oh yeah, well, you're the doctor that does all this production stuff and you're helping them, kind of figure things out. Um, and so when COVID ended, I then had probably, in those 3 years, I made more relationships with people in this town than it would take probably a lifetime. So
Mm.
now, like, yeah, I got all these people on my cell phone. I can call them whenever I want. I mean, like, and then you make great friendships with people, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And not just talent, but like the real producers, the head of Heartbeat Studios were for Kevin's people. Like I literally brought my daughter in to to tour the place and got letters of recommendation from like Kevin Hart's people, you know what I mean, for when she applied
Yeah.
to college
Wow.
or Dave. So because we're all family and they all came by when she graduated. And it's great to see how those relationships just like continue. And so that's why, even now I'd say probably I don't know, probably 20% of my income now comes from films. I just went to Malta. We filmed this shark movie. We sold it to
Another shark movie? Oh gosh.
ANC. It was great. It's fantastic. I saw some of the stuff behind it.
It's not a Sharknado, is it?
No, it's not a
Okay. Okay.
Sharknado. This is
Okay.
just it's just a good old fashioned, Jaws type thing, and it's
Okay.
there. We went to Cornwall, England. I don't know if you've seen Game of Thrones, but
Oh
we
yeah.
worked with Kit Harington and Sophia Turner. It was just on the Daily Show a couple days ago, when she was talking about it. And it's this period piece, this horror period piece. So, so for one, I would say if anybody's really interested in doing those type of things, there are a lot of people, especially in LA, who just kind of talk. And yes, I think that they can get distributed, but it's also being good, who's going to be a good steward of your money and finding
Mm.
out the right people who really know how to do that. It's always about the best advice I got from Wes Curry was always begin with the end in mind, right?
Yes.
So if the end in mind for me is these directors and actors, all they really care is if they're going to be on Netflix. No, but as producers, as investors, it allows me to be creative, to look at the script, to be involved with casting. But because I am busy, I don't necessarily have to be there on the day-to-day on set,
Mhm.
although I do tend to do a lot of that. Um, but if I ever wanted to just direct my own film, I could do it. I put plenty of my friends and family into movies, and gotten them SAG accredited, and they actually have gone on and done well. I mean, there's a whole other thing in music. I did a lot of stuff with Afro beats, and that's a whole other thing where you get to just, again, you just meet people in the industry, and I can kind of I can follow my hobbies and make some money off of it. So
Beautiful.
that's what I really want, people to understand. Like at the same time, dude, invested in some oil wells right down in Houston. Right? Like you're going to have a whole portfolio of things that you're going to do. Starting an entity for providing loans. Actually, years ago,
Mm.
where uh, one of my boys needed a larger loan for his mortgage. I just started that up, and I still have that. It's called Ivy League Capital, right? And so as I really just want to encourage all of these residents, medical students, and young attendings to evolve into not just physicians, but kind of, stewards of wealth, stewards of your community, and doing something that's going to make an impact, not just for impact's sake, but you're like, dude, you can actually do well by doing these kind of things.
Indeed. Indeed. Beautiful. So we'll make sure we put a link to some of your films and works in the show notes if you want to check some of those out. Rapid fire.
Oh Lord, there's a rapid fire.
Rapid fire was only three.
All right, got it. Let's go.
Top 3 non-negotiables when choosing where to practice or train medicine.
Well, another life lesson. Um, there's never a bad job, only bad terms, right? So, like it's just the terms that you need, and those terms are dependent on, the location. So, um, I would say non-negotiables are if you have a non-compete in your contract,
Okay.
that's a no. It's just a no. Don't do it. Don't risk it. There's no point in doing it. Just,
Mm,
I would say, if you have a situation where you have no control over your schedule,
mm,
right? If that's not transparent, if it's not, if you don't have like some understanding, it doesn't mean that you're going to get everything that you want.
mm.
But if you can't make recommendations and all that kind of stuff, then you can't do that.
Okay.
And I would say the last one is, um, if you if you are given some conditional employment, okay? Hey, we're going to try you out for 3 months and see how you do. Many times that's people trying to fix a problem or short-term problem, and then you're left with nothing during an off
Mm,
cycle of employment. Um, you know, I've had um, I've had plenty of people who call me up and they've said, "Hey, I thought I had this great opportunity, but after 6 months, they said no, or even after a year, right? At that point, you've already moved, you've done everything for this job, and then you don't have it. Now, those are like the ubiquitous ones. Now, again, I'm very skeptical of private equity at this point
mm,
because of the interest rates for loans. Um, and many of them have gone bankrupt lately. So that is a Savoyism. I'm saying it's not that it's a non-negotiable, but you need to really, really know what your group is constructed of, right? Even the hospital itself. Look at in Atlanta, they've had some hospitals that have gone bust. You really need to peek under the hood of the financial stability of who is hiring you. Okay.
oof.
Like if you do not do that, you are asking for a problem. And I've had to go in front of hundreds of doctors crying because the places where they worked went insolvent, weren't able to pay their malpractice. They were working without malpractice, didn't have their tail paid, hadn't been paid for 2 months. All of these things because their group went bankrupt. And it's not like one or two. I'm saying
Mm,
that like recently it's been a lot of them. So you need to ask, don't be afraid when you're applying for a job to ask about the financial stability of especially your group. But even, if you're working for a hospital or academic center, especially with all of this money now being redirected away from these hospitals, if you do not ask about that, you are playing with fire.
whew.
Playing with fire.
And yes, we just picked up a new term, Savoyism. I can't wait to use it in a sentence.
Please don't.
Um,
Please
that
don't.
was good. That was good. All right. So for the people that want to know how to follow you, do you have Instagram or to tell us where can people find you?
Yeah. So at the Savvy Doc, TheSavvy Doc. Just hit me up there. I'm on LinkedIn. Um, yeah, just holler at me, man. I have a ton of mentees. I still have my mentor who I call on from time to time, but I probably have, you know, probably 300 mentees, and I try to give them advice through their journey. So if you guys are looking for that, just let me know.
Beautiful. Well, Savoy, we appreciate you for joining us on becoming an attending segment of the Money Script podcast, and we hope to have you on the show again in the
Bro,
future.
listen, man, thanks for saving lives, bro. I tell you,
Indeed. Hey, no, thank you for
no, no, no.
saving
What,
lives.
no, no. What you're doing is you're transforming lives. You're saving lives. Thanks a lot for all the work you're doing in our community, man. All right.
Indeed. I appreciate you. All right, y'all. See y'all next time on Become an Attending. Take care.
That's it for today's episode of Becoming an Attending. Did you pick up something valuable to carry into your next step? I hope so. Remember, the journey is a marathon, not a sprint. So take one step at a time and give yourself grace along the way. Also, this isn't intended to be specific tax or legal advice. Please, talk to an attorney or CPA before taking any action. Before you go, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you're on YouTube, click the bell for notifications. Share this episode with one of your colleagues who is also on the path to becoming an ER physician. Share this episode with one of your colleagues who is also on the path to becoming an attending ER physician. The show notes also contain more.